Welcome, everyone, to Dolls of Our Lives. This is the podcast where we're reliving the American Girl series book by book, except here on Patreon, where we're doing whatever you tell us or we want to do. I'm Mary.
I'm still Allison.
Allison, we gathered today to talk about one of the great works of the American canon, perhaps.
This book is called it's a Dear America book, and it's called Early Sunday Morning, The Pearl Harbor Diary of Amber Billows, Hawaii, 1941.
I mean, could any Sunday morning be more chaotic than No Doubt's song Sunday Morning? The answer is yes. The answer may shock you. We have been changed. We don't even know where to begin with the book. Like, Allison, what can we even begin to say about this book?
I know exactly what I'm going to say about this book. So this book came out in 2001. It was written by Barry Denenberg. We will talk more about his CV in a moment.
Whew.
I want to talk first about the year 2000.
Okay.
And I want to talk about a girl named Britney Jean Spears. All I could think of every time I looked at or thought about this book, which was a lot, and recall, this book is 2001. It's called Early Sunday Morning. Lucky, the year 2000, a Britney Spears single, she says, "This is a story about a girl named Lucky. Early morning, she wakes up. Knock, knock, knock on the door. It's time for makeup. Perfect smile.
Wow.
It's you they're all waiting for. Isn't she lovely, this Hollywood girl?" If that's not a metaphor for the United States the night before, number one, Pearl Harbor, and number two, on the eve of 9/11, take my credentials away.
I didn't know that what I needed today was you doing a dramatic reading of Lucky, the song, but here we are, and I did need that. Thank you. It was, honestly, when I flipped, I don't know why, but I always flip now to the copyright when we do one of these books, because I'm like, okay, when did this come out? Because that's going to obviously determine a lot of probably the choices within. When you see 2001 at this day and age, you're like, oh God, here we go. What hath 9/11 wrought? And Barry basically is here to say Pearl Harbor and a hell of a lot more than that.
So one of the publisher's little descriptions for this book says, on the heels of the much anticipated movie Pearl Harbor, acclaimed author Barry Denenberg has written a moving story of one girl's devastating, spelled wrong, experience of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Barry has written about the greats, Jackie Robinson, Charles Lindbergh, not so great.
No.
Barry was like, what if I decide that I'm going to create a kind of pre-Kardashian traveling family where everyone's name has to start with an A, Al, Ann, Andy, and Amber, and I'm going to situate them in Washington, D.C., and then chopper them over to Hawaii on the eve of Pearl Harbor. And that's what Barry does.
I mean, okay, let's start at the beginning. First of all, when I throw to the back of the book and I see Barry's previous publications, and I see among them a book called An American Hero, the Charles Lindbergh story, anyone who in the 20th/21st century is willing to refer to Charles Lindbergh as a hero, already my alarm bells are going off. Like, what's happening? What's going on here? A man who is isolationist to his core, sympathetic to the Nazis, definitely a eugenicist, so many things we could say. I think his wife, in her grief after his death, went on to write a book about the personality of shells she found on the beach. That's how much trauma this woman was left with by Charles Lindbergh. He also had a secret family. Keep that in mind, unrelated to this book. When we jump into this book, Barry is like, listen, I'm going to take you through the experience of a white family because that's what everyone wants with Pearl Harbor, set in Hawaii. But first, we open in D.C. This is a book that is so fraught with psychological terror that it's before the bombs are dropped at Pearl Harbor, we get bombs that are dropped around the dinner table. We get tension that is so intense that I was like, is this a real book? This is not for children, right? That's how tense it was. I felt like I was watching Revolutionary Road for the first part of this book.
Barry's like, what if a family from Valley of the Dolls went through Pearl Harbor? And
100%.
Mrs. Barry Denenberg was like, I love it. I want to say this. He wrote When Will This Cruel War Be Over, which is the Civil War, Dear America, which I loved.
Yes.
He also wrote So Far From Home, The Diary of Mary Driscoll, an Irish mill girl in Lowell, may I add.
Of course.
One Eye Laughing, The Other Weeping, The Diary of Julie Weiss. He also wrote about a Patriot and the Journal of Ben Uchida, Citizen 13559, Mirror Lake Internment Camp. There is no topic that Barry won't take on.
I mean, truly, there is nothing this man won't do. He's willing to imagine himself into any situation. I think he also wrote a book about the Titanic. Like, truly, this guy was like, any situation. You throw me into the Titanic. You throw me into the mill. You throw me into the Civil War. I will take on Pearl Harbor. Like, I will take on Charles Lindbergh, and I will get so attached that despite archive facts, anything else, I'm presenting this guy as a hero. And I will be greeted as a champion as a result.
Here's why Barry matters. The POV for this book, the supposed author of the diary, right, that is the center of this book. This is barely a diary, which is something I love for Barry. Barry was like, I'm going to write freeform. Every entry is going to be page after page. What I love about Barry is he chooses to come from the perspective of this 12-year-old named Amber Billows. No 12-year-old girl has ever thought anything that makes its way into this book. This is about Barry thinking back on his childhood and rewriting dinner parties he witnessed.
Yeah.
Like, basically the mom is a spark plug, the dad is a journalist, the brother really kind of funny but also irrelevant. What I love about this book is when I read Dear Americas as a child, I'm not super proud to admit this, I never imagined that a man could have written one. Like, in my mind, these were somehow still ghost written always by a young girl, appearing to 100%. A Virginia Woolf woman. This is by Barry, about Barry.
For Barry, you might say.
It.
I mean,
even if Barry only wrote this to read it to his grandchildren, I love this book.
Yes.
What's the famous TikTok? I love this man. That's me with Barry's early Sunday morning.
That's me with this book where I'm like, I don't know if Barry has had a breakdown. I don't know if he's having a breakthrough. But there's something about this book that it's no one in this book is likable.
No.
No one. Not one character. And everyone has inconvenient or inappropriate feelings that get written down. The discussions are out of pocket in every instance, and we're going to get into this. The family dynamics are raw. This entire group needs a therapist. Barry possibly needs a therapist, unclear. I don't think, maybe this is his therapy. He's like, I'm sitting down with my typewriter and I'm going to work some stuff out here. And maybe he does. I don't know, but this book is a fever dream. I agree with you. I also imagined that these books were being written by Harriet the Spy, just for me. So the fact that this man took this on multiple times is both a shock, but also, I don't even know what to say. I mean, I'm processing that. But I had to get up because I was reading this late at night and come out into my living room to read because I was laughing so hard. And again, as Allison and I should note, this was not intentional. A lot of these scenes not being played for humor, but just are. And I think with that, we have to dive into, literally, this book opens with a flash. We're just dropped right into their dinner table. Allison, this scene, I was howling. First of all, Dad is a sociopath, and we're told that on page 1. Because what this man does to this family, the trauma that he puts them through, day to day, he waits till they're at dinner and he's like, hey, everyone, I got a game for you. I got some exciting news for the entire Billows family. We're moving again. And so basically he's like, who can guess where we're headed? And then the character jumps in and is like, just so you're aware, my dad's a lot. And this game needs to be taken seriously. You're not allowed to be upset. You have to make serious guesses.
Mom is pregnant and mom doesn't know. That's actually a really, I think, important insight into this relationship. Mom is hoping they're going back to Boston because that's where she has family and network. And dad is like, sweetie, this is a game. This is our life.
The fact
and
that
it's
this
a game.
man who got her pregnant would not pull her to the side and be like, real quick, let me pull you to the side. I got relocated. Again, the details of this are entirely never made clear to us. We're moving. And I'm going to frame it to the kids because I hope that they will accept it more. Obviously, it's a big upend of their life. Instead, he's like, hey, look, I know you're pregnant. You're probably exhausted. Anything else? It's game time. Get in here. And you're on the same footing as our kids. Thank you.
He says, after they are unable to guess, he says, Hawaii. We're going to Hawaii. Now this next question, logical question. He's a journalist. Is this really all that urgent? When are they going? Next week, Dad said, as if it was the greatest news in the world. This is where like Barry, a tape recorder, and a psychotherapist went hog wild. That's when I had the fit. It all came out. I told Dad I didn't ever remember starting school in September like everyone else. Here's the thing, though, that I like about this character. She's a very careful study of adult speech patterns. And so as part of like her screaming fit, she uses certain things that her mother likes to say. And she talks about how like the mother will say like that people need to see the error of their ways. This girl is screaming. This scene goes on, as you say, in Revolutionary Road style for pages and pages and pages.
It's so fraught.
We then just kind of start with the next day where she says, quote, I decided I wasn't mad at Daddy anymore.
Well, wait a second. You're blowing past like what happened in that fight where the mom, she has a fit. She flees to her closet, relatable content. I also did that as a child. Her mom comes and whispers to her and she's like, my mom whispering is a bad sign. Like that's danger.
Yes.
And then basically the mom lays what, again, I don't know their religion, to me is a massive Catholic guilt trip on this child. And it's basically like, you are not allowed to be upset. You had a fit, so this is not going to be resolved until you take ownership that you caused this, and you have to admit the error of your ways. And then at the end of it, the guilt trip ends with her being like, I explained I'd had enough, but she wasn't finished. That's one of the sacrifices your father has to make if he wants to be a good reporter. I'd had enough, but Mom wasn't satisfied. She explained that besides his family, being a good newspaper reporter was the most important thing in Dad's life, and that we were lucky to have a father who loved what he did. And would I want him to do something he didn't like just so we didn't have to move? Till I wanted to shout, stop, 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 which I did, although I didn't shout it. I just said it. And then it's like, that happens. Like, that's a lot. Okay, we're not going to discuss the fact that the mom is basically like, you're lucky you have a dad, so he can kind of do what he wants and we're all going to follow him. And then she's like, I guess I decided not to be mad at Dad anymore next day.
It's giving Anna Duggar in that now very famous video where she says that sometimes she's mad that Josh doesn't take out the trash. And she turns to camera and she says, but at least I have a husband. Like, that's a famous, it's kind of, you know, we're receiving that same kind of energy. What I think is very smart and very artful in this book is the way that Barry doesn't name specific people besides Lindbergh. We do actually get Lindbergh invoked a bunch of times. We get people who are called like Senator Mucky Muck and other kinds of folks. And we see her observing, because she now has the privilege of being at the family dinner parties, different people talk about politics, and she kind of observes this big difference between like how her mother talks about politics and how her father talks about politics. We get this line, Mom, who of course knows all this about like what her dad is trying to do, said she was willing to listen to most anything but isolationist garbage. She said that she didn't have any readership to serve and she wasn't sitting still for it anymore. She told Dad he was duly warned. Dad looked duly warned. This is like camp comedy for people who grew up in boomer households. And like, I loved it, but I do wonder in what world where people were like, Barry, this is perfect for 10-year-old girls. Like, this is...
Barry, like, this man, in a way, in a year, what year did Mad Men go on the air? Because what this man presents us with is like the aesthetic of Mad Men and like the quiet tension and the politics, but like mapped back into 1941. And he's like, actually, guys, this was not a hallmark just of the 50s. Like, we had this before the war. And he's like, let me take you to my dinner table diplomacy. At one point, he describes the dad like purposefully inviting future or current sources over and, you know, giving them booze to loosen them up, and says he talks so much you begin to think he's a pretty forthright guy, willing to talk about anything under the sun. It kind of gets to you in the mood, helped by what Dad calls, quote, the universal lubricant, alcohol. Of course, no one ever notices that all Dad ever drinks is seltzer. He doesn't like alcohol. He says it clouds the mind. Dad likes to keep his mind very uncloudy. You're like, what? Huh? Like...
So you also have to understand that no one has used caps lock better than Barry in the past decade.
God.
Later in the book, when the family is actually in Hawaii, we learn about Dad's writing process, that you basically can't talk to him. Like, Dad is method for a role that he will never get. Friday, November 14th, 1941. The clock is ticking. She talks about how there's the 10 commandments of the Billows family. Thou shalt not interrupt Dad when he's writing an article. And don't touch the Smith Corona. it's not a toy. The way this was written in all caps, I literally almost wrote in the margins, like, am I in trouble? Like, did I touch Smith Corona? To your point, this family is constantly on edge. And I thought this was actually a hilarious choice. And for me personally, like, a much welcome change. There's something so idyllic about Nanea Mitchell's family. This family is not well. Like, Andy only cares about baseball because he's basically disassociating and pulling away from the family. Mom is pregnant. We don't know how that is going to turn out. This family moving to Hawaii, and then the fact that the father is just like willing to kind of uproot them all no matter what, it does kind of speak, I think, to like a world in which these children are both like objects that are meant to be like perfected to bring pride to the family.
Yes.
Nobody really cares what they think.
Absolutely,
like,
nobody
cares what Amber thinks.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares what anybody thinks like about like what these kids are doing. And it's really interesting that like we get such a detailed description of how the dad as a reporter investigates by purposefully befriending and engaging all these people in conversation and being a really great listener. Like, that's his greatest asset as a reporter, is that he knows how to listen, and he rarely speaks when he has the dinner parties, when he's talking to people. And yet this is a man who never once engages his children in conversation at any point in these books, like almost never. And the mom just kind of exists as like a heavy who has like clearly a mental life we will never know. And it comes out sideways where she's like, you better write your pen pal back or I'll kill you. And there's like increasing threats about that.
The mom is drinking through the pregnancy, which we know 100%. Different times, different values. When they meet this woman that Amber decides to call Mrs. Mouse at her dinner party, we learn that she is kind of struggling and that she is like drinking and she's trying to cope with the dinner by drinking. She constantly wants her martini freshened. Mom said that she recently recovered from a complete nervous breakdown. I'd like to have seen her before she recovered.
Oh my God. Mom! What is happening?
That Senator Mucky Muck gobbled up all his meatloaf and mashed potatoes and asked for seconds. Maybe Mom is right. We learn like this girl is so discerning that her mother has like patterns. Like, if she thinks they're going to have dinner with isolationists, she makes what she considers a very traditional American meal, which is like meat and potatoes. And if they're going to have people who are a bit more open-minded, she makes more of an interesting meal. She purposefully makes the soup too hot for men that she dislikes. I don't know if the mom is an icon or just like trouble, but one of, I think, both. The more like, she's probably both. One of the best conversations that happens in this book is when the family is in Hawaii and Amber makes a new friend, and she learns that her friend identifies as being part of a traditional Japanese family. And Amber has to think for the first time about whether her family is traditional or not, because she's never thought about that. And I really loved it because this portrait of the mom as this like frustrated intellectual comes through. But the mom is ultimately very deferential to the father in pretty much everything.
In absolutely every aspect of life, she is deferential. And it's interesting because you get a backstory at one point that they met because the dad was working at a used bookstore in Boston, and the mom came in working as a nurse, and he helped her get a book off a high shelf, and that's their meet cute story. So this is a woman who like clearly is educated. She's a professional. Like, she has her own career before they got married, and yet like in a way that we associate with a 50s narrative, like she has been stripped of like all of her personhood and has to defer to the dad on everything. And you can kind of just feel the tension that alone is creating in the book. And it feels fraught. We also have to deal with Amber herself trying to get some education about Hawaii before they move. And that was a terrifying moment for all of us, I'll say. I mean, that's on page, I think, 18, 19. Barry could have digged a little deeper, just going to say. I don't know what was happening with him in 2001, but this is how he decided to write about Hawaiian culture in a way that I feel like Barry is part of the conversation about like, do white people have culture? Because he writes very stereotypically about other cultures. White people are sort of like hiding in plain sight. Open question. Do white people have culture? And then we get this about Hawaii on 19. From the pictures and what I read, I don't think the people there look like me. They look very, very tan and have long black hair. They're Polynesian, whatever that is, Japanese, Chinese, and from places I've never heard of, Korea, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Barry, what
And to
happened?
quote Barry back, that's not the only bad news. There are volcanoes that are active. Have you visited a volcano?
Me personally, no, not
I have
yet.
visited two.
That's a big flex. I mean, like, did Barry capture it well?
So I have visited a volcano that is still active periodically in Hawaii, and I have also visited an inactive volcano. Actually, come to think of it, three, because I've been to the Pompeii site and Herculaneum. I don't know that I don't even know what to really make totally of Barry's description. There are volcanoes that are active and earthquakes. There are so many volcanoes that they have their own personal goddess. I thought volcanoes were extinct, like dinosaurs. Okay, kind of same, to be honest, as a child. I didn't think we still had to worry about them, and that was wrong. What I think this book does, though, is it really, really well, and she has this line that she only really knows that Hawaii is very far away. Something I think this book does such a good job at compared to Nanea. Part of why I've made comparisons between the Nanea American Girl books and Kaya is there's this kind of manifest destiny underlacing it that, like, of course, this is the United States. Of course, this will become of what we call the country of the US of A. When you read this book, she feels like she's going somewhere completely foreign because she is. And you actually get a pretty sharp understanding that, like, a random girl living in Washington, D.C. would only have these encyclopedia snapshots. She's not thinking of Hawaii the same way she's thinking of Texas and New Jersey. I actually really like that. I think it kind of makes it less inevitable that the Hawaii will be part of the U.S. Does Barry decide to only have this journal cover 6 weeks? Yeah.
He's like, we're on a tight timeline. We are on an extremely tight timeline. I think his choice to ground this in a white civilian family determines how tight the timeline is, because as we learned in the Nanea books, Nanea book 1, all civilians who were not essential had to leave Hawaii after the attack. So spoiler alert, that's why the family leaves like pretty soon. We're only 6 weeks in the life of this book. But, you know, that does beg the question, like, this is not a book where he chooses to follow a Japanese American or, you know, a white person who lives in Hawaii pre-attack. Like, it is a wild choice to have a Dear America book that is set in Hawaii during Pearl Harbor and have, frankly, half the book take place in D.C. before the family travels to Pearl Harbor.
And what I like about that is it kind of shows a context and a lead up to why this is happening. And it talks about the very real pressures that were on Roosevelt and others to stay out of the war, which I think is not often talked about very much. There were pacifists who didn't want in the war. There were isolationists. And you also get through, like, her understanding of her mother, like people who think Lindbergh is totally off base, right? People who don't agree for a variety of reasons with the way that the US government is handling this. I found myself so absorbed in the wackiness of this family. When Sunday, December 7th hits, it's page 82. I knew this book was only about 120 pages. I was actually in shock. This caught me off guard, which I thought really speaks to the quality of the writing. And I appreciate that this page starts with, "This is the third time I have attempted to write, but my hands have been shaking so badly." Really thinking about if I could go back in time, I wish I understood better what I was thinking the day that 9/11 happened, but I was so surprised and I was so inundated with media. It's impossible for me to separate now what I was told was happening from what I thought was happening.
I think that's a really good point. I think, you know, when we read stuff about Pearl Harbor, we can't help but compare it to our own lived experience of 9/11. And what was interesting, like, to that point, is reading this book and thinking, like, I'm jealous of this fictional girl who thought to have a diary during this really significant historical moment in her life and lives of everyone living in that time. And I did nothing of the kind. When 9/11 happened, I was so consumed by media, which was essentially ephemeral, like glued to the television, you know, in this early era of 24-hour news, like trying to understand what was going on. Like, people in my hometown died, like wondering what was going on. You know, all of, like, people calling each other and all this stuff, that I never sat down and was like, I'm going to keep these artifacts from this moment in my life, or try to remember what happened on the day and how I learned different things. So in some way, it's like, it's interesting to think about the premise of this book as like someone thought enough to want to record their experience to then reflect upon it later. And like, why haven't we done that?
What I did actually, and I haven't thought about this in a long time, my grandfather kept newspaper clippings, and I always thought that was really cool. And my parents, I do remember telling me, they said, keep anything you can with this date on it, with 9/11/2001 on it, because when this day started, you didn't know what was going to happen. And then I kept newspapers from the days afterward, and I kept like special editions of newspapers. But because of the time difference, partially, this book really zeroes in on the fact that like they're asleep and she thinks that she's dreaming. And then she wakes up and she says, I hadn't noticed that the droning in the dream was still there. And when you do a close-up study about how this was reported, a lot of big newspapers that were dailies in the time, depending on what type of daily you're looking at, like morning, evening, between the 7th and the 8th, you get very different content. Obviously, the morning of the 7th here, you don't have this reported. I love this line where she says the dream was over and the nightmare was about to begin. Because she only has a sense that there is something really terrible that is going to be happening. I always try to do that when I give talks about historical events, to say, like, when people woke up on this day, they didn't know what we know, right? To kind of get into that mindset. And this book, like, as much as we're kind of joking, did such a good job of getting me to a place of, this is a family that has no idea what's going to happen, but they know that the world is changing, and like not for the better.
Yes. And I think what's interesting too is like in the lead up to the actual date, you kind of have this B story about the dad befriending a bookstore owner who has lived on the island for 54 years. And they invite the bookstore owner and this lieutenant that he's also befriended as a golfing buddy / source to come to their house for Thanksgiving, where they end up really getting into it about the war and whether Japan is ever going to attack the United States. And the lieutenant, Lockhart, is basically like saying really racist stuff about Japanese people. And he's like totally disparaging of Japan's military capacity to attack the United States. And I thought that was good because, not the racism, but I think that was a realistic picture of how people were talking about it in certain quarters who weren't aware of the full picture. That like the desperation diplomatically Japan held when Roosevelt cuts off their access to the Philippines and areas where they would need desperately raw materials to fund their war effort. So the embargo on American oil and iron and all the things that Japan needed to fund their war effort and build all of their weaponry, that's what really expedites the need to launch a surprise attack on the United States. But this guy doesn't understand the full picture. And it's like, he's in the military. He serves on the USS Arizona. Like, this guy should know that. And yet he doesn't know it. And Mr. Poole basically quixotically says, experience is a costly school, Lieutenant, but a fool will learn in no other. And it's like, uh-oh, Mr. Poole knows what's up. And then the attack happens not long after that. But I thought that was a good scene to have in the book because it kind of positions you to be like, wow, this guy really should have known. Like, I think we look back, like you're saying, and are like, how come this person didn't know this thing was going to happen? And people say that about Pearl Harbor all the time. But unless you really like saw the full picture, there was encrypted messages, and the diplomatic messages from Japan had been like decrypted by the United States, but they couldn't read the military messages. So they did not know that this surprise attack was coming. So I thought, without being explicit, that was a really good way of sort of like positioning us to know, like, they would not have known.
I also think this book plays with the idea of the role of the journalist, because the dad likes to provoke people into conversation. But then when they're really hashing it out, he gets very passive, right? Both like the father and the mother decide that they're not really going to participate in this conversation. And we learn from Amber, who knows her father very well, that he's going to use this as fodder to present opposing sides, really like right in the lead up to like whether people need to be convinced to support a war. We also get, I think, again, this like way that it's described how adults talk. We learn that Mr. Poole gets very low and very quiet, and that Lieutenant Lockhart gets very loud. We learn that Lockhart is starting to lecture Mr. Poole as if he were talking to someone whose intelligence he considered below his. His voice was getting louder with each sentence, as if the size of his audience were growing. He wanted to make sure he was being heard, even in the back row. But you have the parents basically stepping out of this conversation, right? You have these like different audience members who are choosing to not really engage. I kind of wondered what that said about the dad as a journalist, right? Like instead of actually being brave enough to present a position, I'm not saying that they need to do that. He's letting these people really have this very difficult, very uncomfortable conversation, almost as like entertainment, right? Like that he's going to write this up later and kind of use them as opposing sides. And I am not saying that that's what journalists do. This scene goes on and on for many pages until Mr. Poole gets frustrated enough that he leaves. And you're left really kind of not liking Lockhart because you're supposed to sort of side with Poole.
Right.
And then what happens to the two of them?
Okay. This is Barry, like where Barry escalates. I just want to say, like, the choices of what happens to all the characters as a result of this is wild. So first of all, I will get into what happens to Mr. Poole and Lieutenant Lockhart, but first I want to just drop down on the family again. I want to take us back to the family home. It's after Pearl Harbor, it's day of. While they were sleeping, this happened. Dad is not there. Dad went out. The mom immediately becomes clear that the children are going to be tasked with caring for the parents emotionally as a result of this attack. And you first read that when the mom comes to her and is like, okay, this just happened. You and your brother are going to stay here. I'm leaving. I'm going to the hospital because there's a radio call saying all doctors and nurses should come to the hospital. So I'm going to go. And she sees fear in her daughter's eyes. And she's so good, again, the daughter at reading the emotions of her family, that the mom is sort of saying, like, I have to do this. Please let me. Does she say that explicitly, or the daughter is like reading that into her look? Hold on, I gotta look this up. Page 88. Mom looked at me like she was depending on me for something. I have to do this. Please help me, her look said. So basically, the daughter's like, okay, and she's left alone with her brother. And then the dad calls and he's like, hey, everybody okay? And they're like, well, Mom did go to the hospital. We're here alone. We really don't know what's going on. And the dad's like, takes a long pause and is like, I will go get Mom and come home. But, you know, then she ends up going back to the hospital with her mom, which is where we learn that Lieutenant Lockhart was on the USS Arizona and he was thrown from the ship with the force of the explosion and injured both legs, swims to shore, and had to have both legs amputated. And he's like screaming in the hospital.
We also have this incredibly sad visual, which is she's alone. She's not alone, but she's with her brother. She's without her parents. She's extremely scared and she's nervous. And she does two things that I think are in opposition to each other. She builds what they describe as a pillow fort because she's scared, but kind of has this like funny juvenile visual of like, that's what you do when you're a little kid and you're goofing around. And she grabs a cleaver. And I think that this book, like, really kind of gets you into this psychologically very, like, difficult place. And I love to read thrillers. And that's part of where I really applaud the writing of this book is I didn't see Pearl Harbor coming. Like, I got lulled into this false sense of security, which is the point.
Right.
Even though right before they tour the shipyard, they see Lieutenant Lockhart kind of in his element. I didn't see that coming. I did not think that Barry would inflict so much damage. I didn't think the mother would leave the family, right? And it shows that other side of sacrifice that I think the Molly books did very well. The mother is being very brave. She is sacrificing herself by going to this hospital, and the children suffer because of that. And I'm not saying that there were other better solutions, but both parents, both of them deciding that they had things to do that were not staying with their family, I think rings is so scary to me as a modern adult reader that they were left to fend for themselves and they have no idea what's going on.
Yes, and you can feel, and what also I think what compounds this, and again, credit to Barry, is that he gives you details of what she's noticing in her mom's behavior right before she leaves for the hospital that tells her the mom is really not in a good place. And there's nothing more scary to a child, I think, than when you notice that like your parent is not, like doesn't have it under control or they're scared. That makes you even more scared. So at one point he's like, Amber says, I noticed my mom was like freaked out because she told us that if we worried, we should go hide in the basement. And then they're like, we didn't have a basement. Like 911, mom's not okay. She's telling us to go hide in an imaginary place.
And the kids are so scared that they spend the next few nights, like they spend time, like basically in their parents' room, and they're really nervous. And I'm looking at how many pages we have left, and I'm wondering, does this family have any kind of hope for like a future in Hawaii? Like, this is such a traumatic happening. Like, they tried to have the normalcy, air quotes, of a Thanksgiving, but she spends this like early time that she's transitioning here basically like worried she's not a good friend, which like I think she's kind of not, objectively.
She never writes to her pen pal, despite the mom being like, it's curtains for you if you don't write. Like, there's always an escalating threat if she doesn't write to her friend Allison from DC. And spoiler alert, she never does. And that's interesting. There's like a C plot line of her wanting to join, like debating internally, like, should I sign up for the Much Ado About Nothing production through the Shakespeare Club? And you're like, okay. It is striking, though, that she did go to the hospital with her mom, and she literally like watches a man die and is holding his hand and like sees so much traumatic stuff, notices Japanese Americans coming in to donate blood as a sign of loyalty, and, you know, taking so much in, which compared to Nanea and like how protective her family are of like, stop talking about the war and anything they might think might be too much for her as a child. Like, this family, there's no censorship at all. There's no like protection. If anything, like, the dad builds a bomb shelter. He's kind of half-heartedly building it. It's like referred to as a cave. The mom refuses to go there during like bomb scares. You're just kind of like, is everyone falling apart in this family? Like, what is going on?
To the point we talked about a little bit too, with like different ways that a young person might be filtering information. She's not from Hawaii. She doesn't know generations of Japanese people who have lived on the island of Hawaii. She doesn't have that experience. And to our earlier point about, so how do you kind of get at a young person who might be asking questions, right? Like, can I trust this person whose family is from Germany? Can I trust this person, right? All I'm hearing is that the country that I live in is at war with people from this country. Page 98, she is watching, right? Like, basically as all of these people are lining up and they are giving of themselves. And she says, many of the people in line were Japanese, which surprised me. I know it shouldn't have, but it did. It was the first time since early Sunday morning that I had thought about Kame and if she was all right, her family was safe, and how awful this must be for her. She basically separated in her mind the fact that there was a Japanese attack from the fact that her best friend on the island is a girl from a Japanese family. And she says very clearly, like, this is the first time she put those things together. And I think that you don't have to inject like horrifically racist language to say, like, this is a person who is trying to work through these different steps, who's going to see signs in businesses that say, I am an American, if they are owned by people of Japanese descent. That was really smart. I thought that was done really well.
Yeah, I thought that was done well too. And in a weird way, like, Barry was willing to embrace the messiness of race during this time in a way that in some ways the Nanea books totally sidesteps. Like, I think it's difficult when you have a historical narrative centered around a white character to try to tackle racism because you don't want to replicate really racist language or ideas. At the same time, you do have to faithfully represent that, you know, if a period had like really serious racism as this period did that was affecting things that she would have experienced in her life, you can't just erase that. I mean, you can. Plenty of authors just act like it's not happening. And I do think there is kind of a utopian vision of race in the Nanea books that I think doesn't really track. But in this books, I mean, he kind of does get into that, like her trying to navigate people talking about the Japanese as, air quotes, the enemy, while at the same time, like, this has been the loveliest person to her on the island, like at school. And, you know, in some ways there's parallels between their two stories in ways that are really interesting too, of like, both of them are told by a parent, like, you have to be the strong one. Like, when the friend's dad is taken away by the FBI, he says to her on his way out the door, like, you're the strong one. And she has two brothers and her mom, and basically like puts on her, like, it's your job to kind of navigate this for the family while I'm away.
That scene is so well described, and I was really trying to make sure that I would separate out what happens in these books from the Nanea books, because in those stories we have Uncle Fudge who is taken away. In this case, like, it's a very like well described scene. This is not really written like a diary. It really is written more like a novel. We also have this situation where, as you say, Kame is told to be really brave for her family. And then we get this part. Her mother hung up and started crying. She doesn't speak English well enough to do that, to do what she's being asked to do. And then she says an expression that means it can't be helped. And her daughter feels ashamed that she is Japanese, that she has the face of the enemy. She is worried about her father. There are rumors that some of the men who have been rounded up have been shot trying to escape. I think just that age difference, right, of making these characters 12 and deciding to make them really kind of like in on an adult world in a very certain kind of way, I think kind of elevates this. And I was not expecting to like this book more than I liked the Nanea books. And I think if I had to recommend one, I would recommend this one.
Yeah, I mean, is this book completely out of pocket in terms of like the family politics and other things? Yeah, but I think it's also more interesting in the sense that, I wish it wasn't they didn't base the history of Pearl Harbor around a white person who'd never lived in Hawaii, because I think that's a really limiting choice. And it displaces a lot of the sacrifice or the people for whom this was a really life-defining event. But with that being said, I do think this book does something really powerful of like having a main character who isn't 100% likable, or who's willing to say like, yeah, I had a fit, I'm mad, and just experiencing without apology, tough emotions, tough feelings. And, more faithfully representing kind of a lot of the messiness of the days after probably that they encountered, including, not for nothing, and Barry doesn't like judge this act, but he does insert it into the book, that Andy and his friends were going around collecting souvenirs. And on 103, he writes, they're going to make keychains out of the bullets and sell them. And it's like, that's a really bleak image and, a huge indictment of like, or just an example in some ways of like settler colonialism, like after, like while the war is happening, like, a father's being taken away because he's Japanese descent, and Andy and his friends are just kind of like kicking around, like seeing what they can find and keep and maybe sell.
I think if the Nanea books are a Norman Rockwell painting, these are more like a government-sponsored photographer like Dorothea Lange visual portrait. The fact that Lieutenant Lockhart is not a hero was of super high interest to me. The fact that there is a person who is part of the armed services and he is not a hero. The fact that Lieutenant Lockhart is like distorted in pain. He is like he's like visually disturbing for her to look at.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because of what happened to him. But they talk about this as like a hideous sight, not because he is disabled, but he is so like filled with rage. And he has this weird moment of recognition with these people that he basically was just screaming at over Thanksgiving dinner. He started screaming again, as if my recognition has caused him to cry out. I hurried to find Mom. And a representation in pop culture that it reminded me of is like Forrest Gump is sort of like the everyman non-thinking soldier in Vietnam, and his foil is Lieutenant Dan, who becomes like very fiercely against the war, obviously, in the aftermath. I think having this character who like literally gives them a tour of the yard and then ends up with this horrible fate, but serves as this kind of reminder of like, this wasn't just like a thing people read about in papers, like people had their limbs blown off. This was a horrific attack. And to cope, some people helped, and to cope, other people made souvenirs. That all happened, whereas Nanea is like, what if my dog was part of the Hula Act? And I don't say that to like make fun of her. There's something that's like pastel colored over in the Nanea books that Barry doesn't do. I don't know why he doesn't do that, but he doesn't.
Yeah, I think that was interesting. And I guess this is just speculation on my part, but I'm wondering if, I don't know when he did this, but he wrote a book about Vietnam. And he has like done some work on the Vietnam War. And I almost read those moments, or the willingness to kind of put the lens of this book right in the face of like the ugliness and the pain of like servicemen who have been really harmed in war, and just like frustrations of that. Like there is no like easy solution to someone who's been disabled by war, of like in terms of depicting it in a book. Like it's life-changing, it's devastating. And he goes there. And I think something about his willingness to do that is not something that is that common in World War II movies or narratives about World War II. It felt more like a Vietnam War depiction to me. And, somebody I think on the Discord posted some video that exists of Pearl Harbor, and John Ford, the director, was hired to do like propaganda by the government in the war effort, and he filmed a lot of things, including I think some of the footage at Pearl Harbor. But some of the lesser known films that are out there, there are some about veterans after World War II that do kind of foreshadow like the challenges of life after war if you're a disabled serviceman. And I was thinking about those kinds of things where I'm like, Barry kind of went there instead of doing like a John Ford sort of moment.
Yeah, and you don't get a sense of like, oh, and this is what he deserved, right? Like just because we don't like Lieutenant Lockhart, I think that intensifies the strength of our reaction to like, this is a horrible thing.
Right.
That happened to a person that wasn't perfect, right? You don't have to be an angel to suffer in war. You just have to be a human being. And I like that we're kind of pulled into that because it would have been extremely simple to have this like haughty soldier, right? Or Tennessee, right? Who is the soldier that we meet. Of course, we don't want anything to happen to Tennessee. We don't want anything to happen to the dad in Little Women, right? We don't want anything to happen to these characters. But with Lieutenant Lockhart, it's so shocking because he was so bombastic and so obnoxious. And of course, we haven't mentioned this yet, Mr. Poole dies, right? There are no happy endings here.
Yeah.
I didn't even think of that, but Mr. Poole dies, his bookstore is gone, and this beautifully written line, this year we have soldiers instead of Santas. There are so many facts that are the same, like the fact that there are no Christmas trees, the fact that they camouflage the buildings and paint the clocks black so that they're less of a target. Literally the same set of facts appear in the Nanea books and this book. And for me as an adult, this book just really hit me because I still wasn't expecting it to be as bleak as he points out. And I think not always having young people who are immediately resilient and like happy to be struggling. There's an element of Nanea who is like thrilled to participate. And I love that this character says like, this is the worst Christmas I could ever think of.
Yeah.
She's extremely frustrated. And it's not just a flex of privilege. It's just, this is a horrible outcome. Like this has been a very just horrific. Trying thing.
Yeah. And I like that no one in her life is trying to soften it for her or sweeten it. I think in some ways it reads as more stark or depressing because they're so dislocated from their family network. And, like she says, I think around that Christmas scene, like this is the first Christmas I can remember, or maybe it's Thanksgiving, without my grandparents. And, there's no one there. So like, I think, when the hard things happen, you want to kind of lean on the people in your life who are meaningful. And as we've seen, her parents aren't necessarily the warm and fuzzy type, or they're not going to offer the kind of support necessarily that she wants. But there's also, it's like a feeling of isolationist there. Like the mom at least is adamantly against it as a political stance. And yet like the ramification of the start of this war, which, makes isolationism like not something they can easily pursue anymore, is that they're isolated, like they're away from everyone who might help them here.
There is an organic, I think, beautiful moment where Kame's family and Amber's family decide that they're going to celebrate the holidays together. And you've learned that Dad is extremely reserved, that Dad does not drink in front of other people because he doesn't want to let his guard down. And then it's sort of tongue in cheek, but like Dad is drunk on sake. And whether Dad understands that it's alcohol or not, Amber can't tell, or that's kind of left up to you to decide. And you have this kind of wonderful moment where the family seems really close. And that's when Dad decides to say like they are evacuating people, including pregnant women. And as a foil to the start of the book, he says, "So we're moving." Dad said, just like he always does, only this time it was different. How long? Praying it would be soon. The day after tomorrow. Amber turned out to be right after all. We just took a little detour. And you're kind of sad in a way, like you're relieved for this family, but you're kind of sad because maybe there's a hope that these families could actually bond and get through this together. But let's be honest, that's not realistic, right? Like Dad is drunk on sake. He's telling them like, we are leaving tomorrow. And you are left once again to kind of wonder if these parents make great decisions for their children or not. But you're hopeful that at least they're getting out. Like they're not in a safe situation, right? It's not their home in the way that it is Nanea's home. This is somewhere that they have chosen to occupy and they are leaving. And you're really left to wonder, well, the epilogue tells you what's going to happen to Kame and her family.
Oh my God. Talk about the bleakest part of this book is the 2-page epilogue. Like, ooh. Can we just read the first part of this, the epilogue, because this was a shock to me.
I thought I was done with this book. I flipped the page and I was like, Barry? you didn't have to go this hard. We say that about a lot of things.
He did, though.
Barry decided, he's like, having already done the research for a book for the Dear America series, the boy journal about an internment camp. Do you want to just like take turns reading this? Because I feel like we actually need to.
We need to actually do this.
Epilogue. Lieutenant Lockhart and his wife were divorced in 1943. A year later, by then addicted to painkillers and alcohol, he committed suicide. Period.
Mr. Arata was released from Sand Island in 1942. The family, including Miss Kazuki, was sent to the Jerome Rehabilitation Center in Arkansas. It was impossible to trace anyone besides Kame after that.
In 1949, Kame married and gave birth to Grace a year later. When Grace was 14 months old, Kame and her husband were killed in a freak automobile accident.
Amber Billows lost track of Kame immediately after December 1941. She spent years trying to find her, finally succeeding with the help of her father, only in time to learn of Kame's tragic fate.
Amber then located Grace in an orphanage and adopted her. She and her husband, a documentary filmmaker friend of her brother's, brought her back to their Boston home where Grace grew up. She was the couple's only and much-loved child. There was like no need for any of that.
There was truly, Barry, I don't know what happened to you on the day that you sat down to write this, but what in the world was going on? Like, Barry, why? Like, what?
Lieutenant Lockhart getting addicted to painkillers and alcohol and deciding that he did not want to carry on. I was like, okay, this was a little bit shocking, Barry. Authors have done different things with the epilogue. Some of them choose to focus really closely on what might have happened to a lead character and to kind of carry through with that. I don't, like you say, I don't know what possessed Barry. Like maybe he had some sake before writing this. Good for him for not glossing over. I love that it's like, even this generational divide, it's like she married a documentary filmmaker. Not that she became one, she married one, and they raised their child in Boston, back where the mother's family had been from. I want to know how long mom and dad lasted as a couple.
I don't think long. Like, I think in San Fran, she's like, listen, I know it's complicated. I'm still waiting to give birth, but, you know, I've low-key contacted some divorce lawyers, and maybe the dad wouldn't even notice. Like, I was kind of wondering if we were going to get hit with, like, dad became a war correspondent and was, like, traveling all around. That did not happen.
Barry's decision to not even go there is, like, Barry, like, just choosing. He's like, the next time you'll hear about San Francisco is with Julie Albright. I'm not talking about it. I'm not going there. This book, page 141, had an absolutely shocking ending. All around the country, people were driven by fear. The bombing of Pearl Harbor had brought war too close to home. Then we learn further on, the war raged on for nearly 4 years. On August 6th, America dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. On August 9th, another was dropped on Nagasaki. On August 14th, 1945, Japan surrendered to the Allies. No country has tried to invade America's shores since. And I was like, Barry, what are we doing here? Like, Barry, is it okay to call you that? Like, Barry, like, what are you trying to tell us? I do think, like, that is a very real argument that lives in people's mind, where it's like people learned what will happen when you try to invade the United States. Barry, I don't want to say 9/11 because you didn't know, but like,
Barry,
they came on shore. Like,
it happened. Like, I mean, this is 2000. Barry didn't, or it was too soon. But like, Barry, I have really bad news for you. Barry, I mean, no, I know, I'm with you. But it's also just like, I'm just remembering, I'm looking at my notes. Barry also, for apparently no reason, like, again, he didn't have to go this hard, goes into great detail about the fact that seamen trapped in the USS Arizona were suffocated to death and or killed by some of the rescue attempts after the boat capsized. Like, they were heard tapping.
I told you this off air.
I know, and I was like, like, when I read this, I was like, Barry, why? Do you want to explain more about that? So I didn't really explain what happened.
No, so some of the people whose lives were lost were not necessarily lost as a direct result of the Japanese air attack. They were lost in the days or the hours and the days after that attack, partially as a consequence of how these things were built and people just simply not being able to escape. And the US government was not transparent about that for a very long time. What I like about this book, and I think the Vietnam piece is like very important to keep in perspective, Pearl Harbor is not this kind of event that existed in isolation or just like happened somewhere. Like real people suffered terrible deaths. Other people were extremely afraid. Folks were persecuted because of who they were as a consequence. And in that climate of fear, I think this book like strikes on that very well. The Peakins of the Past is not perfect, or whatever they're calling it here, but I do think it delves a little bit more deeply into like why internment happened. It helps you picture it a bit better, and it really focuses on the fact that Americans of Japanese descent like overwhelmingly showed up to serve and overwhelmingly wanted to like show and demonstrate loyalty to this country, and that there really was like no basis at all, like just to point out the obvious, for internment. Like there was no like secret spy network. There was nothing that was uncovered. It was truly just a racist government executive order. And I think this book really like brings that to the fore in a way that American Girl doesn't. It's like, Uncle Fudge.
Well, it's like kind of what we were saying with Nanea is like it's so focused on the current USO work and like trying to comfort real children of military families contemporaneous with the publication of Nanea that it can't possibly question the reasons why you would choose to serve in the military. Like it can't actually call like American, like it can't separate choices the US government made from the choice to serve your country. Like members of the military are not responsible for choices or decisions the government makes. They're defending the country regardless. And yet like that nuance is not in the Nanea book, or like they're not willing to go there. Whereas Barry is like, as we've learned, willing to go anywhere. And I thought it was also particularly important that he notes that Mr. Poole's bookstore was destroyed along with Mr. Poole by friendly fire. It was an American missile that misfired and killed him. And he's willing to put that in the book. And I think that's really important because it's really important to kind of say, you know, in war, things happen unintentional. And there's real human lives lost to it, just in the same way that it's like, he makes it really clear that internment was about nothing but racism.
I do think I can't like say it enough. That's the dividing line between a children's book published for a popular market pre and post 9/11, right? Yeah. Like this is not shaped, as you're saying, by like a need in a market for like good children's literature for parents who are like serving in very large numbers, or to get young people to want to serve in a specific kind of way. This is in that kind of weird, like Desert Storm is, you know.
Yeah. It's like, it's weird to me. I wonder like how, if maybe people out there raised in military families during this era will write to us and tell us, but like, I've read different memoirs and things, like I'm not from a military family, of like servicemen. There's a book called like The Long Gray Line that follows like 4 cadets at West Point in the class of 1966 and like literally goes with them through Vietnam and then through the 80s and so on. And you watch as they like navigate their own patriotism and service with like a growing distrust for the project of Vietnam and like coming to terms with that and their service. And it's like they can hold both of those truths, that like they think the war in Vietnam was a mistake and they're also very proud of their service and patriotic. That nuance, I think, as you're saying, is a really important trait of like post 9/11 depictions of American service or like military service, even historical depictions.
Yeah, I always recommend the book Jarhead. It's something I read as an adult and I really appreciated, and I didn't think that I would. There's also a book about Thank You for Your Service and kind of unpacking like what that work does in the United States. But yeah, I would love to hear people's opinions on this. And we mentioned on our main feed, but we'd love if people had ideas about ways to better understand like Indigenous Hawaiian perspectives, because that isn't the direction that a lot of publishers chose to take, right? Or obviously with Nanea they did, but there are other books like My Secret War, which is a different Dear America set in this same time period. Most of the World War II content is just very different from this. If you know Barry, like tell us. I don't know, we have like a lot to chat about.
Would love to sit down with Barry and just like have a rap sesh.
I would love to have Barry and Kirby talk. Like Kirby, I learned because I signed up for her newsletter. She wrote the Nanea books, like does outreach and teaches internment to children. Like Kirby's fascinating. There's so much there. I would say, like, I don't know how we're going to follow this up, but we're going to the original JB, not Justin Bieber. Who are we covering in April?
Oh my God, I'm so excited. We will be reading an iconic Judy Blume book. We will be taking on, let's say, the world of Judy Blume, but we will specifically be reading Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
Is it about you?
Could be. I mean, honestly, like I'm hoping to reread this book and be like, whoa, I did a talk like a month ago and a woman on there totally serious. I was like doing a talk on bibliotherapy and she was like, you know what? I read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret with my daughter, like when it came out. And I just found it in my house and I decided I would reread it and just see like how I felt. And she was like in her 70s. And so I was like, so what was your thoughts? And she was like, it holds up. She was like, it's very good. So that's what's in my head.
Version, which is with my sister's. My sister got it when it first was coming out. And I picked up a version at the bookstore the other day. The present version that they're selling, not the one that features the film, but the one right before that. Are You There, God? Is a text bubble on that cover. So we'll have to do a little discussion of like different text covers because I have my sister's like very early version, which is very like 70s, 80s, and was in a box that like very recently moved with me. So we'll see how that holds up. A box my cat took particular interest in. I'll just put it that way. So we'll have to see. Are you there, Raymond? It's me. Anyway.
Can't wait.
If people are you there, Mary? It's me, listener.
Oh my God. Wow, powerful. Yes. If you want to get in touch with me, feel free to reach out on Instagram at Mimi Mahoney or Twitter at Mary Mahoney 123. How about you, Allison?
I'm at BarryDunenbergFanClub.com. I'm actually at Allison Horrocks on Twitter and Instagram. Feel free to DM me on Twitter. I get DMs from people offering me like castles and like investment opportunities from disposed princes all the time. So I'd love to hear from you there if you're not in that category or even if you are. So yeah, I cannot wait till April. I'm very excited for you all to hear us and to join us on our Judy Blume journey.
Yes, and we're also starting talks for some of our future PowerPoint parties. There was a call within the last one. People couldn't even wait for that to end, saying we need a reality TV PowerPoint party. So we're going to have some plans set for that very soon. We had someone else suggest an AG fandom one, which would also be fun. And yeah, lots going on. I picked a topic. Okay, for reality TV?
Of course.
What's your topic?
1 fish, 2 fish, 3 fish, catfish.
Oh, ooh, I can't wait for that. So I did add a spreadsheet on the PowerPoint Party channel on Discord. So if you want to go put your idea there, I'll probably do a more formal, like a form like as I've done for the past pretty soon. But we will get in touch. I really can't wait for any of those. So thanks everyone for supporting this community, and we will see you on our next episode.